This is the BioCentury Show.
Brought to you by BioCentury Grand Rounds. Join BioCentury and Insights partner McKinsey & Company this September in Nashville for an R&D forum at the interface of industry and academia.
I'm Steve Usden, Washington editor of BioCentury, and today I'm speaking with Derek Lowe, the man behind an improbably popular blog, In the Pipeline. I say it's improbable because Derek writes about drug development, chemistry, similar topics, things that you wouldn't think would attract a really broad audience, but he has. He's attracted a large audience, and a lot of his readers are not in the life sciences industry. I know that because when he mentions me in a blog, when I'm out walking my dog, my neighbors come up and talk to me and say, Derek Lowe mentioned you in his blog. And they don't work in biotech or life sciences or anything like that. So, you've done something that has brought a very diverse audience, and from the comments, a very intelligent audience to the field. So I want to start with that, start with your blog. How did you get the idea to start it? And how do you go about writing it?
Yeah, it's a fair question. I get that question a lot because it is kind of a strange thing. If you told me back in 2002 when I started that I would still be blogging most every day in 2024, I would not have believed you for a moment. Not at all. I was sure I was going to run out of material long before then. But I got started because I was reading some of the early blogs, and I have always enjoyed telling people about science and what it is that I do. And if I was just, meeting people or a party or whatever and telling them I do drug discovery, the response was always, that's a really interesting sounding job. I didn't know people did that. And when I started reading some of these blogs, I thought, I should talk about this because people are always interested to hear about it. Clearly, no one knows anything about it. And there's a lot of stuff to talk about. Now, I didn't realize there would be 22 years worth of material to talk about and counting. But that's what got me started. And I've always been very glad to give presentations or write up papers or summaries or the like. So sitting down and writing it wasn't the hard part. It was just having the idea, I guess. That was the limiting factor.
So actually, it's like people say about going to the gym. The hardest part is getting out and actually going there. But I think there's more to it than that. I think that it's not even the topics that you write about. It's the way that you write about it, which is not condescending, but it's also accessible to people who aren't specialists in the field. That's what makes it interesting. What topics? What topics resonate the most with your audience, and which are the least interesting, which are the least popular?
Yeah, it does vary a lot, and I consciously try to vary the topics day to day so that people have an expectation that if today's post wasn't very interesting, it's probably not going to be the same stuff tomorrow. So I rotate between chemistry and biology issues, maybe something from other fields of science entirely, some government stuff, regulatory affairs, once in a while, intellectual property, all sorts of things. I think the stuff that gets the most response is, as you would figure, immediate news stories. There was a ridiculous amount of traffic spiking on the blog during the pandemic, of course. So anything to do with the initial coronavirus during that era or the vaccine development and all that just brought in ungodly amounts of traffic. Short of that, I think that some of the controversies inside the field, and some of those we're probably going to get to talking about today, get people going. Why did this drug fail? What's this new technology like? Is it really something big, or is it just more hype? And there's been a lot of hype in this business, of course. That gets people going. The stuff that doesn't get people going, well, one of them is IP. When I write about patent and legal issues, I can almost see the readership declining in real time. People are fleeing. It's like I'm spraying some kind of repellent.
Which is surprising because, it's surprising and not surprising. It's surprising because it's really important, and it's not surprising because it can be pretty dry.
It can be, yeah.
So let's dive into one of the things you say about things that are in the news that get people interesting. What I've been writing about, like almost nonstop for the last few weeks, is the Biosecure Act, which aims to decouple the U.S. and the Chinese biotech industries. I'm wondering what's your take? What do you think about the proposition
Yeah.
that Congress should drive Chinese companies that provide drug development and manufacturing services, as well as genomic sequencing equipment and services, out of the US market?
Yeah, it is a tough one because I am generally a free trade kind of guy, and I don't really care much for dirigist sort of interventions into industrial areas by the government. So philosophically, I would be expected to be opposed to this. As a practical matter, I know where they're coming from because it's the same sort of thing that the industry itself has been, cognizant of and wondering about over the years. What is the security situation with the Chinese contracting business? That's why we tend to put everything outsourcing in the very earlier stages of drug discovery and development. This has been true at every company I work for. You put that stuff out there, and then you bring the higher value added, more crucial, more late stage stuff back in house. It gets closer and closer to your own building as the process goes on. So people are already aware of just broader security concerns. What I've noted though is that, and you would probably even have more details on this than I do, is that the Biosecure Act, as it's being marked up between the House and the Senate, seems to be a much less fearsome bill than it was originally built at. A lot of grandfathering, a lot of exceptions, a lot of long timelines.
Yeah, so they're trying to create some breathing room for the industry because if they just cut everything off now, one of the things that this has done is it's exposed how important these companies are to the biopharma ecosystem. If they were to just cut it off now, there would be drug shortages. There would be hundreds of millions of dollars worth of investment in drug development that would be disrupted and things like that. But there's also, and you're talking about the security issues, IP issues, things like that. But there are broader issues at stake. There's a kind of philosophical feeling in Congress that the U.S. should somehow try to limit China's advance in the life sciences, and that there's a kind of zero-sum game here. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I'm not a fan of zero-sum thinking, especially in the sciences, because there's enough around there to go around for everyone. And I'm also not a fan of autarky. I don't think that a single country is capable of doing it all on their own, unless doing it all is defined very minimally. So not any advanced industrial country. You can't. You've got to have partners, competitive advantage. Some people do things better than others. Right now, the Chinese and to some extent the Indian contractors do early stage chemistry and biology work for the drug industry faster and cheaper than we can do it ourselves. So naturally, that's why people use these contractors. They've been extremely useful. But you see exactly where the national security angle of this, because it's an election year as well. So people are going to be trying to make hay out of the fact that the Chinese, they have to be stopped. They're coming for our industry. They're just going to steal everything and run off with it. I don't think that's happening. I think people should be aware of the possible security implications, but honestly, you're right, if we didn't have these timelines and grandfathering in there, it would be a disaster. We do so much business through outsourcing in this industry. It's just gotten more and more every year I've been involved.
So you mentioned about hype and I'd say the opposite, hype and hope, right? And you've written a lot about various things over the years. Today, you wrote about AlphaFold. Recently, you wrote about large-scale chemo proteomics.
Yeah.
And you've been kind of, on the one hand, you've been enthusiastic about some of these developments, and on the other hand, you've been skeptical about AI. What's in the two buckets? How do you divide it? The realistic hope and the unrealistic hype?
Yeah, it's tough. I enjoy the fact that I've gotten grief from both ends of these issues. People who say that I'm too, much of a stick in the mud, old fashioned, I got to get with the program, and others say, you are just falling for this stuff, aren't you? So that makes me feel good. That makes me think maybe I'm in about the right spot. But for a lot of these things, like for AI, I tell people that I'm a short-term pessimist and a long-term optimist. I don't see any, I guess, mathematical or physical or philosophical reasons why techniques like this shouldn't be extremely useful. There are practical reasons, though, why they may not be useful right now, which is, of course, what the hype is telling you. I've heard a lot of presentations over the years from computational and AI companies, and they generally all start out with a couple of slides that say, the revolution is here, right now, happening right as we speak. Your competition is ascending into the clouds.
Jump on board or you're going to miss it.
Yeah, exactly. You better get on board. Here's your chance. Computational nirvana is at hand. And I've heard that so many times that, and then I've never seen it happen, that if anyone comes in right now and says they've got it all figured out, I'm not going to believe them. But if someone says this is never going to work, I'm not going to believe that either.
So, you've got companies that are investing massively in it. Recently, Arch Ventures led a $1 billion investment in an AI company, which it says is not just going to create services. They're going to create a whole drug company from the ground up that's going to be based on AI. What do you think about these efforts? Do you think that, if we blink and come back in 5 years, is the industry really going to be transformed by AI?
Not in 5 years. Not in 5 years. Now, if you ask me to come back in 20, maybe, but the VCs do not have a 20-year time perspective on this stuff. So, but I don't think so. In 5 years, no. In fact, I've been reviewing a paper today to blog about that talks about the success rate of AI-discovered drugs. And there was a substantial number of these things in the paper which said that these were AI-discovered targets. And I thought, really? I'm trying to think if I know of a single AI-discovered target. And they had like 20 or 30 of them. When you start looking, you find that these are not new targets for the most part. They are press released as being new, but if you dig into the literature, they're not. So I think it's still early days in this stuff. We're going to look back at that 20-year period, and we're going to look back at 2024 and think, those poor people, look at that crappy hardware and software they're running. No wonder they couldn't get anywhere.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the thing that resonates with me about AI is the line that whatever AI you're using now, it's the worst one you're ever going to use, right? Because it's going to get better much, very, 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 very rapidly.
Good point. Good point. And of course, I'm actually speaking later this week out at a conference in San Francisco on AI stuff. And the point I'm going to be making out there, I'm on a panel there, is that the problems that we have in the drug industry that we want to solve are almost inversely proportional to the ability of AI to solve them. The really, really hard stuff, picking targets and anticipating human tox, I don't see much help coming, on those anytime real soon.
So you and I have been doing this for a long time, and on the one hand, you see it and you look, well, the number of drugs that are developed every year has ticked up a little bit, not enormously. The amount of time and money it takes to develop a drug has increased actually over the years.
Yeah.
But I think that's offset by the fact that the ambition of what the industry is doing is immensely greater than what it used to do. The kinds of drugs, the quality of drugs, the things that they're doing for humanity are things that would have been laughed out of out of court 20 years ago, 15 years ago.
That's a really good point.
Am I being Pollyannish or what?
No, that's not as much as you might think. That's a really good point, because you remember back some years ago, we used to hear all this wailing about Me Too drugs and how the industry was just repeating each other's successes, and that's all they do. Jesus, why are we, et cetera. And you don't hear as much about that anymore. It's true that right now there are more really new modalities of treatment that are currently being investigated or in the clinic or in some cases hitting the market simultaneously than have ever been going at any time in my career. And I've been at this for like 35 years now. I'm just glad I was able to hold on long enough to see this. There's a lot of really interesting, unusual, and ambitious stuff going on. Yeah, you have a point.
And what it's meaning for humanity, it's preventing and in some cases curing diseases that have afflicted people for millennia. sickle cell and some forms of cancer that they're completely cured or prevented. Things that obesity, 10 years ago, who would have thought that obesity would be something that could be handled, or that Lilly or Novo Nordisk would be two of the most valuable companies in the
Yeah, that too. That would have been useful information to have 10 years ago. Yeah, it's true. I mean, I worked on several obesity projects over the years, and it was a graveyard. Everyone worked on it, and everyone's targets failed over and over and over. You and I can list off 8 or 10 or 12 different obesity targets that crashed and burned. But that doesn't mean that no obesity target will ever work. That's the thing about this business. We don't know enough biology to say that something is absolutely positively never, ever going to work.
Well, that's really interesting. We're going to talk about some of the other things that you're seeing coming up in the future.
Sure.
Right when we come back, we have to take a quick break now.
The BioCentury Show is brought to you by
This September in Nashville, BioCentury launches Grand Rounds, a new interdisciplinary R&D forum at the interface of industry and academia. Join BioCentury and a rich roster of innovators and key thought leaders to identify leading-edge discoveries and discuss urgent challenges that must be solved to translate these innovations into product development and medical practice. Meet academic innovators, physician scientists, early-stage investors, and biopharma R&D leaders for 2 days of networking, partnering, and debate. Register at biocenturygrandrounds.com.
I'm back speaking with Derek Lowe. Derek, you haven't shied away from talking about controversial issues over the years. And I want to talk to you about a couple of them. One is lawsuits seeking to overturn FDA's approval of mifepristone, an abortion drug, and FDA's approval of Aduhelm for Alzheimer's. So first, mifepristone, the Supreme Court's considering the case now. What do you think it should do, and what do you think's at stake?
I think that they should bow out and reject this challenge to the FDA's authority. I mean, it may sound funny to have a guy who's worked in the drug industry his entire career sticking up for the FDA. I mean, we should be natural enemies, but we're not. I have a lot of sympathy for the people working at the FDA because they are really in a tough position. Half of their constituents think that they're just a completely useless barrier to progress, and the other half think that they are just complete shills for the pharma industry and will approve anything we send them. Neither of those are true. But in this case, in this Supreme Court challenge, I think that this challenge is really, if you were to completely go along with the arguments on this, it would dramatically undermine the FDA's ability to regulate. And I don't think that's what the people bringing the challenge want. I know what they want. They are anti-abortion, and they want to fight any means of abortion by any means possible. But gutting the FDA's ability to regulate the industry, I don't think is a very good trade for that. I honestly don't think that's going to happen.
So basically, they're aiming at abortion, but the collateral damage would be to say that the judiciary can and should second guess FDA's regulatory decisions.
That's exactly right, and I think that'd be disastrous. I also think that some of the people bringing this challenge don't really care about that one way or another, as long as abortion gets hit.
I think you're right. Aduhelm, you wrote that it's one of the worst decisions that FDA's ever made, or something like that. What did you mean by that, and do you still think it now?
Yeah, I did not like that Alzheimer's approval. I really didn't, because the data were not there. And the FDA has made a few decisions like this in recent years, and it seems to be based on well, gosh, there's nothing else. Maybe we should just approve something. And I think that's a terrible reason to approve a drug. And if you're approving something that you don't know if it works or not, you're not even approving a drug. I just cannot see it. I get accused of being heartless about this, but to me, being heartless is offering false hope to patients and their families and saying, yes, we now have a true medication, one that's been reviewed and approved. Thank God it's here. And it turns out to be sugar water. And maybe worse, because some of these Alzheimer's antibodies have some side effects like cerebral edema and brain shrinkage and things like that. And I don't think the efficacy numbers are there. It's really disheartening.
So you say some of these antibodies. So are you extending that beyond Aduhelm? What do you think about the other drugs that have been approved for Alzheimer's?
I haven't seen anything that I think is really convincing in a real world setting. Some of the data do look better than that first approval, but God, anything looks better than that. You had 2 trials, one of which absolutely failed, one of which worked if you closed one eye and squinted. The FDA's own statistician said that they couldn't see any way that this actually was approvable, but we approved it anyway. The other data look a little better than that, but still the improvements on the Alzheimer's rating scales that we're talking about, from what I'm hearing, would be very difficult for an actual human being to notice in everyday life.
Yeah. So really the question is, what good are you doing people if you're approving something that has no discernible benefit and has some real drawbacks?
The evidence of bad side effects is much stronger than the evidence of benefit for Alzheimer's. I guess that's what it comes down to for me.
I want to talk about something else. You blogged a lot. And you said earlier in this conversation that you got a lot of interest in your blog during the COVID experience.
Oh boy.
The thing that surprises me is not that you got a lot of attention during COVID. What astonishes me is that 1 million Americans died, many of them, in my view, unnecessarily. The drug industry created effective vaccines in record time, and nobody talks about it anymore. It's like we have this amnesia about it. How did it affect you, besides your blog traffic going up? How did it affect you, and what lessons do you think that the drug industry and society at large should take away from that experience?
Yeah, you're right, though. It really does seem like something that happened almost like in a dream. Not a good dream either. It really is being forgotten. I think in many cases, people are intentionally not sitting down and thinking, gosh, let's remember just what that was like back in the spring of 2020. Because as you recall, if you start thinking about it, it wasn't a hell of a lot of fun.
No, it was not.
But what the drug industry was able to do, you're right, we were able to develop vaccines in record-breaking time, thanks to a confluence of hard work, long-term research, and a few lucky breaks. The fact that we had already been working on a very similar coronavirus, SARS, a few years before, that work was crucial to getting things going. A lot of very fortunate things, and we may not be as fortunate next time another pandemic rolls around. I hate to say that, but it's true. What struck me, though, was that people, some of them took the lesson that, so you can come up with a drug in just, a year and a half. Well, why don't you do that all the time? Which is infuriating, because this was the most incredible crash program you've ever seen, based on a lot of legs up that we already had. And yeah, this is the record, but it's not like this is the new normal. God knows.
So one of the other things, you think about this and you think, well, look, the whole world faced this threat. If this was a movie, everybody in the whole world would have come together. They would have stopped all the wars and all their squabbling, and the world would have come together to face this if it had been Martians or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
But that's not what happened. The opposite happened.
No.
And one of the things that happened is that there was an exponential rise, I think, in medical disinformation and in misinformation. These are really serious concerns, and I'm wondering, nobody wants a ministry of truth, and it's not going to work. But what would work? What do you think could work to deal with this rise of medical misinformation and disinformation?
Oh man, I wish I had a quick answer to that, because it's concerned me too. And you're absolutely right about the difference between this pandemic and the sort of thing that you would read about in novels or see in movies. We didn't all come together. I think if we actually did come under attack from malevolent aliens from Zeta Reticuli 4 or wherever, you would have a substantial number of people claiming that it was all a front of the current administration and there are no aliens, and et cetera, all this footage is fake. It would be just the same sort of garbage. What do you do about it? I mean, one of my fundamental principles is that you can't use reason to argue someone out of a position that they didn't get to by reason. And these conspiracy theories were not arrived at by reason. People pretend to themselves and to others that they're just doing the research and they've pieced it all together. But no, this is an emotional response. People have an emotional response to the vaccines. They think that this is some sort of evil contagion that is going to affect the purity of their bodies. You want to give this to my children? Oh my God, what kind of beast are you to inject this horrible brew into them? I can't. So I don't see how you argue people out of that. It's extremely deeply seated. I mean, there's a Latin phrase, mundus vult decipi, the world wishes to be deceived. And like all these phrases that are old enough to be in Latin, it tells you it's a problem we've had for a long time.
I actually think that what you do actually helps. And I'll tell you
well,
why.
Thank you.
And I'll tell you why. Because I read something in a completely different context recently. Somebody wrote, they said, you're never going to convince people that they're wrong if you insult them, right? And one of the things that comes through and what you're writing, it's very reasonable, but you're also and you take strong positions on things, but you don't insult people and you don't talk down to them. So I think that that's actually something that's going to help bring us through.
I hope so. That really makes my day to hear that. I hope so. That's what I try to do. Now, once in a while, I do lose my temper, and there are some people I have insulted on the blog, but I like to think that they truly, richly, deeply deserved it.
I think probably some of them that you've been nice to probably deserve it also. But so that leads to another kind of related question, which is, the biopharma industry, you've been in it your whole life. You've seen what it's done for humanity. Its reputation is in the toilet. It's like tobacco. It's like products that are poisoning people.
Yeah.
Why do you think that is? And what are the consequences of it?
Yeah, I thought about that a lot. And one of my theories is that people have this idea that the default setting for day-to-day life, for normal life, is great health. That's the default setting. So when something happens to disturb that, it's a shock. You got this diagnosis, you have this disease, something happened. Who or what did this to me? Something did this to me. I'm going to find the culprit. And the pharmaceutical industry pops up at that point. The only time people really hear from us is when they're sick. And I think a lot of people get this impression that we're just waiting. And then we come along and say, well, got a disease, do you? We might be able to do something about that if you have the money. So no wonder they hate us. It's the only time they think about medicine at all is when you need it. So that's part of it, is that people just have, understandably, an unrealistic idea of the fact that we're all going to get sick at some point. We're all going to die. I hate to be such a ray of sunshine here, but these things are out there waiting for everyone, and we are trying to do something about it. You'd think people would like us more, but they only hear from us when these things happen. So we're kind of seen as some kind of vulture coming down from the sky.
So, well, maybe part of it then is turning that around a little bit and working, you would think, working more on prevention, working more on things to keep people healthy. But, that doesn't get a lot of purchase either. People aren't really interested in doing things that are preventive, and they're highly skeptical of them.
No, they're not. And I think because a lot of the preventive stuff is a little bit of work. I have a lot of friends who are like general practitioners and like, and they are sick to death of telling people to exercise and lose weight. I mean, those two things would help an awful lot of the population with a lot of really common conditions like incipient diabetes and high blood pressure, metabolic syndrome in general. People don't do them. They just don't. And a lot of preventative stuff goes in that same category. If the prevention involved taking one pill every month, you might get a few more takers. But we don't have anything like that yet. It's kind of hard to find that stuff.
No, but we do have Ozempic. People can take a shot.
There's that.
And
boy, that's selling like hotcakes, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, so what excites you looking forward? You've mentioned, new modalities. We talked a
Yeah,
little bit about the 20-year potential maybe for AI. In the near term, what are the things that are exciting to you
yeah.
that you think are really going to make a difference?
I'm excited about, as we mentioned, the cell and gene therapies that are going on right now. There are so many variations on these and so much yet to be discovered there. I'm excited to see where that goes. I am also very excited on the small molecule end, which is where I've spent my career, in things like protein degradation and all sorts of interesting bifunctional molecules. We're doing things in cells that we have never been able to do, that no one has ever been able to do. And we're going to learn so much by doing these things. And two, we're going to be able to affect some disease targets in ways that they have never, ever been affected before. Some of that's going to work out and some of it isn't, but I think there are some dramatic things waiting out there. We're going to have to spend a lot of money and a lot of time on this, but it's just great to see totally new modalities. It's like coming up over a hill and you see this giant undiscovered country full of all these amazing things. If I were starting out in the industry, I would be thrilled. I'd be like, my gosh, I'm going to have enough stuff out here to keep me working the rest of my life.
Well, we'll leave it there. It's really inspiring, and and again, I want to thank you for the blog that you've written
Well, thanks.
over all these years. It's been a source of pleasure for me every morning to wake up and read it, and I think a lot of other people.
Well, thank you very much. I'm going to continue writing it because honestly, it's a source of pleasure for me to write it.
Brought to you by Biosecure Grand Rounds. Join Biosecure and Insights partner McKinsey & Company this September in Nashville for an R&D forum at the interface of industry and academia.
Kendall Square Orchestra provides the music for the Biosecure Show. The group connects science and technology professionals and other members of the greater Boston community to collaborate, innovate, and inspire through music while supporting causes related to healthcare and education.